Welcome to The Hats. The Hats is a weekly podcast hosted by licensed marriage and family therapist and author Melissa Dumaz and attorney and business owner Kerri Harper-Howie. Listen in for practical tips on how to keep your hats upright, how to handle life when one of your hats gets lopsided, and plenty of real-life solutions to help you balance the many hats you wear daily.
Hello, Hatters, and welcome back to the Hats Podcast. I am your co-host, Melissa Dumaz, and I have here with me today my co-host.
Hi, Hatters. So glad to be back with you again today. I'm Kerri Harper-Howie.
So, Hatters, today we're talking about the lifelong learner hat. And lifelong learner, like if you try to say it fast, you're going to stumble because I have several times. But I know that this is an episode we've had on our list for some time, Kerri. And I know that in previous episodes, we've talked about being lifelong learners, but we decided to wait and leave this specific hat for this season, season 9, the Boss Babe, Boss Bitch hat. Tell me, what was your reason or what was your idea? Like, no, Mel, we should put it in this season specifically.
We've typically approached the idea of lifelong learning as a tip within an episode, someone who's interested in wearing another hat, growing within another hat. But I think because we have identified throughout this season, through our guests and in our own conversations, the fact that being a boss bitch is really about leveling up. You can't do that. And not just leveling up once, but someone who's constantly making, as our guest Monique Earl said, boss moves, plural. You're continuously trying to do that next thing or go to the next level. And I firmly believe that in order to do that, you've got to live the lifelong learner hat. So that's why I think it's so important that we give it this topic its full due during this season, as opposed to a prior season. This is the perfect complement to me to being a part of the Boss Bitch season. What about you? What do you think?
I love that. I think that there's no way that we can call ourselves ambitious women or that anyone can call themselves ambitious without the idea of understanding that you're going to be on this continuous journey of learning. Even if it's not learning in the classroom, taking the course, getting the continued education units, it is learning about yourself, learning about your challenges, because we all hit our own version of like the glass ceiling. And then we get to decide how we burst, break, get through that glass ceiling. And even in my own journey as a therapist, there was a time where I realized, like, you know what? I've been doing trauma work with clients for a really long time. There's a treatment model out there that has had my attention for years, and I haven't taken the time to learn it. Now's the time. And so, it added value to my practice. It added value to me personally. It added value to my clients. And so to think that what I learned in grad school was enough to get me to my next levels in life, to make those boss moves with an S, I would be kidding myself. And so it is only right that if you are ambitious, that you are also a lifelong learner. And if you have not considered yourself a lifelong learner, then this is the episode for you. If you have considered yourself a lifelong learner, this is the episode for you.
Either way it goes.
Either way it goes.
There's so many things in that I want to speak to, but I want to get to our first question, which is, we've talked about being a lifelong learner a little bit here and mentioned it in previous episodes, but we've never actually defined it. And I don't know that either of us, we kind of take it for granted, like this is what you should do, but would love for you to kind of flesh out, Mel, how has being a lifelong learner, wearing that hat, shaped your personal and professional journey?
Great question. It has opened my eyes in a lot of ways. It has taught me some things that I didn't know. Even something that we've talked about in previous episodes was our decision to take a podcast course when we decided to launch our podcast. And, you could think like, oh, just grab some mics, hop on, and boom, there you go. But there were things that we learned in that course that we didn't even think about. Even when the facilitator said, even if you're starting with a friend, you should have a contract. We were like, oh yeah, huh? We're thinking we're friends, we trust each other, we know what that looks like. But it said, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so being a lifelong learner is also for me taking that position that I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. And it's also that reminder of a quote that we hear very often, which is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I do believe that, because in order to get to next levels, in order to make boss moves, you're going to take with you what you already know. But what you already know may not be enough to sustain you for that next level.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, when I think about what does it mean to be a lifelong learner, the living the lifelong learner learner hat, it means whatever space you're in, being intentional about learning from that space. And just like you said, even if you are leading the group or hosting, you are the therapist in a therapy session or you're the teacher in a class, you absolutely have moments where you can learn from that experience, right? It's about not taking for granted what you want to take out from every single experience. And there absolutely are moments like taking that podcast class where you're like, I'm in this space just to be a learner, just to be a student. But to me, really living that hat means whatever space you're in, you want to make sure you pull some kind of learning for yourself, and then you can possibly share with someone else. And for me, I think I could not in my personal I'll say my personal journey, and you gave us some really excellent questions. I'm very excited to answer one of them because I was like, what is the answer to that? But for my personal journey, I have shared very openly, just for example, about the very emotionally unavailable environment that I grew up in. And it was important to me to learn in my personal life, from my personal journey, how to be the best wife I could be, how to be the best mom I could be, and continuously learning how to be a good friend. And so I am constantly trying to learn to spend my personal journey learning about emotional availability, development, being open, all the things, right? We've talked about so many of those emotions, and I've learned even in talking to you on our episode. So that's what it's meant for my personal journey. And then professionally, you kind of mentioned this in your answer. I was a full-time lawyer at one point in time. You can't be a lawyer, at least in California, without doing what they call continuing legal education, because the presumption is exactly what you said, Mel. The law is always evolving. The presumption is that you don't know. You've got to find a way to keep up. So in your professional life, you want to make sure that a part of your journey is just learning and not assuming that even the most expert of expert, that you know every single thing. So I think being a lifelong journey is such a key part of anyone in both their personal and professional journeys.
I agree 1,000%. And to be reminded that our careers require certified education units to continue learning is such a reminder that that is also required in our personal lives. And you mentioned your own personal life. And when I think about that from the perspective of a therapist, is the reminder that, like, that self awareness, we're continuously growing if we're open to that level of self awareness. And also, there's something that our pastor talks about, which I share with my clients, is that at some point in your marriage, when you've been married for a while, you have to renegotiate partnership.
Hmm.
And it is under the presumption that you have changed from that moment you said I do to now when you're celebrating your first, second, third, fifth, 20th, 30th anniversary. You're not that same man or you're not that same woman. And so naturally, we're evolving and changing. And if we are doing it well, then we're also learning along the way.
Absolutely. So, how then, if this is an imperative, if being a lifelong learner is an imperative, how do you make sure as to create space for it when your life is already full of responsibilities, deadlines, roles, things you want to do, leveling up, all the things? How do you create space for it?
The first word that comes to mind is intentional.
Mm.
You have to be intentional. I think that there's some learnings or learning that happens without being intentional, and that can just be in conversation. Like Kerri and I talk a lot outside of the podcast, and it could be a conversation about family or about being wives or about business. And in those moments, I will learn something from her. Like there'll be a light, I call them those aha or those light bulb moments. Those are learning moments, and they may not necessarily feel intentional, but if you come to a conversation open, then that's where the intentionality starts. If you come to a conversation knowing that you are in trusted hands, then that's where the intentionality intentionality starts. But sometimes it means being even more intentional than that. And that could look like registering for the class, scheduling class, reading the book, listening to the audiobook, listening to the podcast, taking notes when you're there, taking notes while in church. And so you're being intentional about the information that's being fed to you, and then doing something with it, implementing it into your life. And all of that takes a level of intentionality. And even if that's therapy, if your therapist is providing some level of like homework or soul work or your assignment to do after that session, then that is being intentional about the personal development or the self-awareness or the healing that's taking place in your therapeutic sessions. And so we have to be intentional. That is the main key or the main word that comes up for me. Kerri, I know that you can be very strategic in the way that like you show up and the decisions that you make. What does that look like for you? Like I'm using the word, intentional, and meant to be intentional, but I'm really curious about how do you make space to be a lifelong learner? How do you make space for this responsibility of learning and advancing and making boss moves?
My calendar.
Okay.
That's the first
I
word
told
that
you. She's strategic. I told you.
And I love that you're all, you have a much more, they say holistic, flowery, but very real. So I'm not knocking it at all. But the first word that it's funny because what I thought you were going to say was boundaries. You threw me with intentionality, which is so true. I thought you were going to say boundaries. For me, though, it really is about calendar because I know that I want to do things that allow me to learn and to grow and to develop. And so it's funny because I'm in this space right now where I'm like, okay, I want to do more personal training. I have held off on personal training for years. I've not done it for a very long time because my calendar did not allow. And so I kind of got to the space, actually, very specifically summertime, because a trainer that has come to my attention doesn't live close to my house. So I'm like, this is a chance for me to try this out. So with summer light traffic, I am going to, okay, and I have set boundaries with this trainer. This is my time. I am leaving at 6:50 because I need to be home in order to do the other things that I need to do to meet my other responsibilities, to get to my appointments on time, etc. And so I am, very dogmatic about not doing anything without it being on my calendar. And this got me in trouble 2 days ago because I'm so used to a particular person in my office sending out calendar invites for something, and she didn't send it out, and totally understand. But I also didn't put it on my calendar because I was waiting for hers. No. I've got to have that placeholder to make sure that I can be accountable because that's how important the learning is for me, that I put it on my calendar in the same way that I put doctor's appointments and meetings with corporation and, vacations that I have to do and children's soccer games. Learning for me is that important that it earns a place on my calendar.
I love that because you're right. If it's not on the calendar, it's not happening.
Man.
It is not happening. I'm sorry. So, if it's important to you, put it on your calendar. If it's important to you, set boundaries around it. If it's important to you, be intentional about it. I love that.
Absolutely.
So, what's something for you, Kerri, that you have unlearned recently, and how did it open you up to new growth? Excuse me.
This is the question I was waiting for.
Ooh, we're on the couch now. We're on the couch.
Yes. Okay. So I had one thing came to mind, and I was kind of like, that wasn't recent because your question was recently, and I know I'm a little anal, so I'm kind of like, I need a recent lesson, and so I didn't want to go with that. I'll just drop the other one, which is that control is an illusion, right? I have been learning that for 13 years, 2 months, however old Caleb is. That's how I have been learning that lesson, how I've unlearned my belief that I was in control of anything. But what I very recently learned through therapy, so my husband and I are currently in couples therapy. We talk about that publicly and proudly. And our therapist is amazing. Shout out to Shamita Johnson. She is spectacular. I would recommend anybody for her. But one of the things that I have learned in our therapy is that love is not transactional. And one would think that one would know that, But I had been struggling for years. One of my chief complaints, and you already know this, Mel, and I'm not oversharing. I don't think Sanford will be embarrassed for me to say this, but one of my chief complaints was I don't feel like you plan enough things for us to do. I want to feel planned for, right? And in that not happening to my level of satisfaction, I felt like I wasn't being loved and I couldn't accept him saying, but I love you. Like, I'm here, I show up, I'm at home. Like, all these actual ways that he was showing love. For me, what was reigning true was the transaction. And I can absolutely 100% trace this back to previous relationships, my childhood growing up. And I really, and that was a revelation I truly came to on my own with the assistance of our therapist and with Sanford being very engaged in, our therapy together. And I realized it's not about the transaction, but it's about actual unconditional love. Transactional love is conditional. It's conditioned on the receipt of the thing. And so that has been really transformative for me personally, just as in the way that I receive love, in the way that I try to make sure that I show love to my children, that it's not about like this moment or this thing that I've done for you. And so I have unlearned that. And I won't say that I don't sometimes default to that mindset because it has been in me, frankly, since the day I was born, which is fine. But I'm so keenly aware and I'm able to just even interact with Sanford in a totally different way, recognizing. And I will say, I talked to my sister about it maybe last week. And so she and I have offices where we can hear each other, but not always see each other. So I'm in my office and she's in hers. And I was like, do you sometimes feel like you think of love as a transaction? And she was like, oh my gosh. So we had a whole conversation about it, and it really rang true for her too. Not surprisingly, we grew up in the same household, and Mel, enough to know that our perception and receipt and experience of love formed very early on, right? And so, that has been just a tremendous personal unlearning of love. And so I think I shared, and you can tell me if I didn't, how that I feel like that has really opened me up to new growth. But I do feel fundamentally more open. It's been this really wonderful discovery.
I love it. And I can see the like joy and the light and the energy just like radiating off of you. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see. And it also, what it speaks so loudly to me is that lifelong learner in you that's excited to have this new knowledge,
Yeah.
this new information about who you are. And it's so wild how the things that we're unlearning, we also realize how they were holding us back or preventing or not keeping us open. All this time we're thinking we're open, we're open, we're open. And then your eyes open to what you're unlearning or what needs to be unlearned. You're like, oh, I really been closed off because I had this thought or this idea. So that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Would love to know of an experience that you've had
Woo
with an
wee.
unlearning of things.
Oh my goodness, I feel there's so many, and I'm like, where do I even begin? Something that I have been recently unlearning is, and I don't know where I got it from, is this idea. And I don't even say it was an idea because when I was doing it, it didn't seem like an idea, but this idea of like overgiving. And
Mm.
that's something new that I'm learning. And even the conversation that I had with my own therapist when we first recognized it was happening was this conversation of like, the reasons that I'm doing it, because sometimes people overgive. It's to be liked or to be loved or to all of these things. And I think for me, one of my love languages is gift giving. So I was like, well, and me trying to rationalize it, I don't know. So I was like, well, maybe I'm doing it because I'm trying to speak my love language to other people. But I had to ask myself, like, girl, are you overgiving because you want to be liked? And I was like, no, because part of me is like, I don't care if you like me or not. I like me. But for the people that I do like and I do love, like I find myself, overgiving, whether it's of my time or my energy or actual gifts. And even now I'm in a season of life where I have to ask myself, like, you said yes to this thing. Is this you overgiving? Are you going to be okay with this later, and having to check in with myself later and realizing that it's a process. And to your point, like, when you have defaulted to a thing for so long, it's easy to become your default. And so you have to, in the process of unlearning, also give yourself grace and permission to, like, I may bump my head and show up in that way, but now I have the information. Now I have the knowledge. Now I have learned how I show up in that way. And I can have these self-awareness conversations with myself. Like, are you overgiving? Are you okay with this? Do you need to set a boundary somewhere that you're not setting a boundary? Because when we find ourselves overgiving and we're not setting those boundaries, that can in turn turn into resentment. That can return turn into frustration. That can return turn into disconnection. And it's all because of not communicating our boundaries or not having those boundaries or doing more and realizing later, I didn't mean to really do all that. I don't really mean to do that much. I did too much. Extra like guac.
I have been on the receiving end of some of these random gifts, and I'm always so like, oh my gosh, like she's so sweet, she's so generous. And so I absolutely see that in you. And, I don't know that I would have recognized it as a challenge that you needed to unlearn. But I love hearing this idea that, you were coming to some sort of realization that it wasn't serving you the best. And so you had to unlearn that. And I think what comes up for me is the word wisdom, right? It's really about developing. Unlearning to me is it's the converse, right? So we're learning to get more information, to learn and to elevate and to level up. And the unlearning is about gaining wisdom about things we believe, we see, we think we know. But they're two sides of the same coin, both of which are so important. And I think as we continue to try and learn more, we're also going to have more and more things we need to unlearn. And we also have the benefit, I think, of age, which also gives you perspective and allows you to be willing and able to unlearn some things. Because, when you're younger, I don't know that you have the perspective
Right.
to be able and willing to unlearn some of those things. So I think it's beautiful that you've unlearned this pattern, and that you are willing to acknowledge, I'm still going to do those things, but it's the intentionality that you said, it's the asking of questions. And for me, kind of the same thing. Why am I upset about this? So if your question is, why am I motivated to give in this way? Mine is, why am I upset about this? Okay, well, because I'm not getting the transaction. Well, is there something else that this can be seen as? Is there another way for you to express what you're trying to express, perhaps without giving of yourself, of your finances, of your time, of whatever it is? Is there another way to express that thing? So, it's this, again, lifelong, it's living that lifelong element and recognizing that it's there. So, getting to our last question, we kind of, I think, are falling right into it. But we, as lifelong learners, have that curiosity and that hunger that will not be quenched. Like, it's not just going to go away. And so, how do we make sure that if we find ourselves in a space that's not necessarily open to that's open to our voices, open to our questions because we're trying to learn, how do you make sure that you protect yourself, your curiosity, your hunger for information in those spaces where perhaps it may not be so welcome?
Great question. Before I answer that, I want to highlight a couple things that you shared about perspective and also about us having age on our side for that wisdom. It's also a reminder too that at this age in our 40s, that we're not too old to learn,
Mm,
and even when you talk about, what you're learning or unlearning about yourself from couples therapy, that like it took you in your grown age of 40 something to learn this, like, and that's okay. That we're not too old to learn or unlearn something that we've been doing for years or haven't been doing. And that's the beauty of being a lifelong learner. And then the other thing too, one conversation that I have with my clients frequently, because sometimes they'll get this level of frustration about, like, I should have known that. How come I didn't know that? Or how come I didn't realize it? And sometimes we have to unlearn or learn something first before we could see what that next pattern or what that next thing is. Very similar to you're not learning multiplication and division until you learn how to add, until you learn how to subtract. Like there's levels. So sometimes when we're learning and unlearning, some things have to be unlocked first before we even have access to see what that next thing is that we need to learn and unlearn. So don't be upset with yourself in those moments of how come I didn't know that or how come I didn't see that coming? Because first you had to learn this in
Yes.
order to learn that. And that's okay.
Can I just add to that? I often said in the beginning of my relationship with Sanford, I would have never been able to appreciate even what I did appreciate about him until I had gone through what I went through with my ex-husband. And
Mm-hmm.
you could not be more right, Mel, that some things are foundational, and that's what time gets you, is that foundation to be able to reflect back upon and then unlearn. So I just want to say that that is so true, so real, that the foundation has to be laid in order for you to learn, unlearn, to move to the whatever that next level is.
Right. Absolutely. And so now that we have that understanding, to answer your question, Kerri, how do we protect that? How do we show value to that? I think first we have to value it for ourselves. And you and I have already acknowledged that we value it in each other. And I especially value it in you, and I especially value it in other friends of mine because I believe that iron sharpens iron. If you're out there in the world getting sharpened, oh baby, I know you're gonna bring some of that home and you're gonna sharpen me too. If I'm out there in the world getting sharpened, then I'm absolutely gonna bring that to my circle of friends, to my clients, to my business, and sharpen them as well. So that's one place. The other thing is that I think that us learning and protecting our voices and what that looks like is our responsibility. That even if you work, for a company or for a business and you have a role, or if you have a 9 to 5, that your learning is still your responsibility. Even if that means going to your supervisor, your team lead, and saying, I saw this course that would really help me better as a manager. Is there funds that we have that can send me to this course? Like being able to advocate for yourself or even just taking it on your own. So I think that it's our responsibility. I think that it is important for us to do our own research rather than sitting back and waiting for the class to happen or for our friends to offer the teaching or our partner or whoever it is that you're in community with, that it's important for us to take responsibility. It's important for us to see the value for ourselves. And then lastly, I would say that once we have it, it's important for us to protect it. Now that you're responsible for it, it's important to protect it. You said you put it on your calendar, which is a way of protecting it. I said being intentional, which is a way of protecting it. You also said having boundaries, which is a way of protecting it. And so you have to find, how will I protect my lifelong learning? Maybe that is having an additional budget or funds for courses, workshops, personal development, therapy, whatever that looks like, but finding what resonates with you the most so that you can protect that space.
I think those are all really excellent tips. The other thing that comes up for me is to be confident that what you're doing is right, to really sit in your confidence and your belief that what you're trying to learn is better for you and better for everyone else around you. And when you kind of sit in that confidence, that is what gives you the strength, I think, to speak up, because that is absolutely what I tell people in our organization. If you want to learn something, let us know, speak up. Because you see it, you have ideas, you're on the front lines. If you have an idea or you want to learn about something, you want to own a process or a system, speak up and let us know, because if you're not tooting your own horn, somebody might not know the right key for you, to play for you. Like, you really got to make sure that you know what you need, and to not be afraid also to be vulnerable enough to ask for help, because I think that also is something that might prevent you from getting additional resources or additional learning, is the idea that you might be perceived, particularly in this space that we're talking about, as less than or unprepared or not knowledgeable enough to do the thing, but really thinking of it as an enhancement. You are enough. You are able to do it, but this will be a value add to you and whatever organization that you're doing this within. And then I think, just from a personal perspective, if your journey really is about being a lifelong learning in your personal space, you've got to make sure, I think, that the people around you understand the need for you to be a lifelong learner. And I am honestly in deep relationship with people who are not necessarily lifelong learners in the way that I am, you know? And so I have to make sure that I let people know I need to do this in order to show up as my best self in our relationship. So you really got to keep those lines of communication open. Like we said, some of this learning is just osmosis, but some of it does require the intentionality, the scheduling, the finances, so to make sure that your household finances can afford for you to learn in this way, in this method. And if not, don't be deterred by that. There are so many ways to learn the things that we want to learn. So perhaps it is, scouring YouTube University before you sign up for the master's degree in, architectural engineering. You might want to go on some videos, learn about Legos and some of those principles about making sure a bridge doesn't fall down, right? So it really is about making sure that if this is something you want to do, that you are intentional about it, but you also bring in people who need to be involved in that lifelong learning that you want to participate in. So that's kind of some of my thoughts on how you can make sure you protect it, and that your curiosity and your hunger to learn are able to actually be fed.
Yes. Yes, yes. And that communication piece is so key. Like, I didn't even think about that when you talked about your team and your staff communicating with you, like, hey, these are some things that we're interested in. But then also when you talked about communicating with your household, because there could be something you want to learn that requires you go to another state or another country or be gone for a weekend. And what does that mean for your household? What does that mean for your finances? Such a true point. And it reminds me of something my husband said to me recently. He was like, you've changed. You've changed a lot. He didn't say it in a derogatory way, but he was making the point after my husband had a conversation with your husband amongst with some other husbands. He was making a point about how it seemed collectively that some of the men feel like they're the same and that the women have changed. And I know that part of that change for me has been learning through osmosis and learning through intentionality. And so I can see how that can create some disconnect or even some confusion in a relationship. It was like, you're not the same Melissa you were 30 years ago. And I'm like, yes, thank goodness,
Yeah.
because baby. And he's like, I just want her, and so it is important to communicate when we know that about ourselves, or if our partner doesn't see that, to be able to communicate like, yes, I very well am a lifelong learner, and that may change the way that I show up, hopefully in all of the best ways, but that can change, and communication is important.
I want to add that, kind of to your point about it's never too late to learn. It's never also too late to start that journey, right? It's never too late for you to decide, I've not been a lifelong learner. I've just been, working my grind, living my life, raising my kids, and I've been just fine. But now I am ready to do something different. And wherever you are, it can have ripple effects in your life. It can be that you want to learn something personally, and that has impacts on your career, on your 9 to 5. And it may be vice versa, that you have career goals that impact your personal life. So, and if this is the first time you're really doing something actively to pursue this lifelong learner hat, that's also when communication is key. So my belief is that really, Khalil, enter this relationship and you were a lifelong learner from day one through day to day, right? And also these things happen gradually over time, right? So it's not that you just wake up and you're like, I've learned all the things. When you're someone like Mel, you've been learning along the way. Some periods more intense than others, some periods more intentional than others. And so you do kind of wake up and your partner can be like, oh, there are some changes. But if you're right at the beginning of really stepping into living the lifelong learner hat, you also may have kind of some challenges. So I would just encourage you not to be dismayed. There are ways for you to find opportunities to keep learning, to start learning something new and different and bigger and better or bolder or wrong. the thing you learn might be that you need to unlearn that thing you
Right.
thought you wanted to learn, right? So just, be open. Mel says it constantly. Give yourself grace, give yourself space and the opportunity to figure out, because learning, sometimes the lessons we learn are difficult ones, right? I don't
Yes.
know that
Learning from our mistakes.
learning from our mistakes. So that is a part of this journey too. So also, I think, don't hear either of us to say, I went and I learned and I grew
And I'm
because,
perfect.
and I'm perfect, because that ain't it. Right. So, just want to be clear about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. The learning from the mistakes is part of the process as well. And one last thing I'll add, when Kerri said that, you may have to do YouTube University to learn, there's also your local library. There's so many free resources, even resources that I myself don't take advantage of, through your local library or by having a library card. So there's a lot of ways to be a lifelong learner. And Hatters, we hope that you have heard, that you have learned some amazing tips today to be alongside you in your journey of learning. If you're not there yet, then hopefully these tips will embrace you wherever you are to be a lifelong learner. But we are so grateful that you're here. We're learning a lot. We hope that you're learning a lot, and we tip our hats to you. The information in this podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, medical, or therapeutic advice. Listening to this podcast does not take the place of developing an individual relationship with a therapist or attorney. If you need help for mental health or legal issues, we strongly encourage you to find a professional in your area who can help meet your individual needs.